So lately I've been really busy working on some sewing pattern releases, my latest one being the Zippered tote bag, which you can watch here. But when designing these and making the illustrated instructions, this is a super precise, detailed work where I have to repeat making the item or details of the pattern to make sure everything is super clear and accurate. By the end of the process, you can feel a little overwhelmed and burnt out, and your sewing mojo can take a hit. So today I thought I would show you one of the ways I get that back after such a project and just really allow my creative sewing side to take hold and have fun. Today I'm going to take this valance sheet that I got free with a blow-up mattress and I'm going to try and turn it into a top. I had a general idea of what I was aiming for, which was a shirred peasant blouse style. I wanted it elasticated and fitted over the bust section and then with a loose flowing lower half. For the sleeves, I wanted this volume in the upper half and then a shirred cuff to copy the bust section. Now, one thing I have learned when you recycle items into clothes is to allow yourself flexibility in your work. For me, the joy is to start with an idea and let that evolve as I go with the ideas of the fabric presents me. So though this is a plan, it's not set in stone, and you will see how my idea develops as I work. Examining my fabric, I have quite a short width, so what I can see I am going to have to do immediately is piece together two lengths to get the distance I need from neckline to hem. I can also see I have plenty of elastic here, and that may be something I can use within my design. I wanted elastic in the shoulders to stop the sleeve falling down, so I may try to use what is already here rather than adding fresh. Another element in this valance that I could try and take advantage and reduce my work is the little baby hem that it's been finished with. That is a finish that will suit my blouse. I take all these things into account when I begin deconstructing and cutting my different sections from the sheet. I did make a quick pattern for this top, but I didn't end up using it. So for a quick summary of what I cut and how I got my dimensions, I used the following measurements. If you're trying this design for yourself, you can cut it from regular fabric too. For width, I used a basic shirring calculation of double the final width. So I measured around my widest area, which is my bust, and I cut that twice with a 1 cm seam allowance each side, giving me an identical front and back. For the shirred bust section, I wanted to create a channel to thread elastic through at the top for a closer, neater fit. So I added 2 cm to the length of the top rectangle to accommodate this. I began construction on the bust neckline. By creating that channel, I would later thread my elastic through, by folding under by 1 cm and then 1 cm again. I secured this by stitching along the edge of the fold with a regular straight stitch on my machine. You don't have to include this elastic in a sheared top, it just tightens the edges if you do and reduces the volume of the frill at the edges if that isn't the look you're aiming for. The bust was then attached to the hip section at the waistline, right sides together, using a 1 cm seam allowance. This seam required finishing as it was a raw edge. I use my overlocker, but you can use any method you prefer, such as a zigzag stitch on your regular machine. I have a tutorial available here on seam finish options if you wish to check that out. Once done, the seam was pressed down towards the hem. I then finished the raw edges on either side of this section before repeating the whole process for the back of the blouse exactly the same. I placed these right sides together and aligned the side edges, carefully matching the waistline seams and the top and bottom edges. This was sewn together using a 1 cm seam allowance. Each seam was pressed open. I pressed these open to reduce bulk during the shirring process that follows. Shirring works better on lightweight to medium fabrics. To set up your machine for shirring, you first need to increase your stitch length. Next, increase the tension on your machine. Now, every machine you use will require slightly different settings for each person, so you may need to mess around and experiment with these before you go ahead on your actual garment. Shirring uses an elasticated thread in the bobbin and regular thread on the top. This elasticated thread must be hand wound round your bobbin. Do so gently. You don't want to pull the elastic taut, but you also don't want the shirring elastic to be loose. This is why machine settings change for individual working it. I recommend winding a couple of bobbins at once and having them to one side ready to use later. I used one entire reel of elastic shirring thread on my blouse, and I think that worked out as approximately 6 bobbins. Place in your machine and we're ready. Starting at one side seam, ensure your garment is right side up. The elastic bobbin thread needs to be on the inside of your garment. Align your footer with the top edge of your neckline and use this to guide you as you sew in a steady straight line all the way round your blouse. I personally like to backstitch at the beginning and end of each row, but I know some people say this causes problems with their machine. If you can't backstitch, just make sure you're leaving plenty of thread out before you begin. You now have a row with some elastic in. Do not worry if you're looking at this now and think, wow, this is way too big. The shirring effect doesn't show in full tension until about the 5th or 6th row. This is why you should do a small test swatch to check you're happy with your settings before you begin on the real thing. Begin your next row at the same side seam you started your first, and this time align your footer to the previous row of stitches. You want to pull the fabric taut as you go so that the fabric isn't bunched up, creating creases. Again, you can't really see this properly at this stage. Between each row, keep an eye on how much elastic is remaining in your bobbin. With shirring, you can't really start a row midway through. You need to go from seam to seam or round in a loop for the most secure finish. At this stage, you just keep going, focusing on keeping a consistent distance from the previous row and in a straight line. If you want a larger distance between rows than that of the width of your presser foot, before you begin, use an erasable marker to draw your rows on with a ruler, and follow this as your guide. As the rows build up, you'll see more tension, and this is when you'll feel how you have to pull your fabric flat as you sew. I switched machines in my process here as I began to get tension issues, which I'll show you later. I don't know why, but I've always found that my super basic beginner no fuss machine does shirring with a consistency and reliability I never manage on my more high-tech machines. On this project I reached row 4 and it was like my machine began to compensate for the elastic and try to correct the tension. I'm sure there is a workaround, but for me it's just better to get out my basic machine and use that. So you can see here where I made the switch. The top section was fine and the bottom section's fine, but this middle section is a lot looser and it doesn't have the same spring as the other parts. To fix this, I will go in later and unpick these 3 rows and redo them on my basic machine. Again, I've used my longest stitch and increased the tension. I've said in previous tutorials that the more expensive the machine doesn't equal the better. You have to buy the type of machine that suits your sewing style and has the features for the type of projects you're waiting to complete. I continued down all the way to the waistline, and now the finishing step is to steam the elastic. This will make it contract and tighten everything up neatly. You could stop here. This is a perfectly serviceable blouse. If you made the hip section longer, it would be a great summer dress for the beach. I want to begin on some arms though. At this point, I decided to change my design to a short sleeve rather than a 3/4 sleeve, as I simply did not have enough fabric left. I still wanted to keep that original shape with the cuff though, with the elastic band at the top to keep it from falling down. I examined the section I had and decided to try and make it work as it is with the original hem and elastic. To make the arm round, I pinned it together at the short sides and sewed it with a 1 cm seam allowance. The seam was pressed open and then the raw edges finished separately. At this stage, it is best to put the blouse section on and take measurements whilst this is on your body. I will show you the measurements I made on my mannequin. Starting at the side seam under the arm, measure forward to the location you want your strap to attach at the front. For me, I wanted the sleeve to connect far enough in to cover my bra strap. Mark this with a pin if you wish. Repeat this for the back of the top also. You'll likely find this is a similar measurement. Now we have the location of our sleeve top where the elastic will sit. Measure from point to point over your shoulder. We will need to remove some of the fabric from under the arm and attach the sleeve into it. Measure down a distance that gives you a comfortable clearance from your armpit. Remember not to go too low or you will find the blouse will lift when you raise your arms. Finally, take your sleeve you have constructed so far or the elastic you will be adding to your cut of fabric. Elastic can be added to the top of your sleeve using a channel like we made first on the neckline. For me, the elastic is already in place. Hold this at your connection points to find the distance needed for a taut shoulder line. You need enough tension that your sleeve will hold up, but not dig painfully into your skin. We will remove the arm section from our blouse now using the measurements taken. So mark the locations and as you can see the back and front distance is almost identical. So I'm going to make it symmetrical and go with the widest of the two. Use a curve to mark the shape from point to point, remembering to leave a 1 cm seam allowance. You have some flexibility in your cut lines with this style of blouse, so you don't have to be too precise. Cut away on this line and then use this fabric as a template to cut the other side. Some people will gasp at cutting the shirring lines because they unravel. Personally, I find so long as you keep movement to a minimum and don't stretch the fabric, it will remain as it is, so I can secure it in place again with the sleeve seam. If you are worried by this, feel free to run a half circle of basting stitches just inside of the cut line prior to cutting to hold it. We can now access the channels we made first to insert the elastic inside. I actually decided I quite liked the fitted look here and I felt secure on my body when tried on, so I left it out. To insert, all you need to do is insert the length required by threading it through from side to side with a safety pin. You can secure at either end with some basting stitch while you work. You can do this for the front and then the back, or either as you decide. Want to copy the shape cut from the blouse armpit area to the sleeve. Place the cut fabric aligning the side seam to the sleeve underside seam and cut it out. If you were inserting elastic, you would do this now, making the circular length from either side of your cut equal to the elasticated shoulder measurement. As my elastic is already in place, it already matches this length. Once again, use the fabric you cut out as a template to cut the other arm so that it is symmetrical. Working one sleeve at a time, align the two curves just cut together, matching the seam lines and the top corners. You may feel you have a slight excess of fabric in one to the other, but just ease this between the matched points. It will allow the elastic to expand and contract with wear without putting pressure on the seam. So with a 1 cm seam allowance. You can check your seam is attached neatly before you proceed, and yeah, there is that movement we spoke about. To complete, we will finish this seam on the overlocker. The process is repeated the same on the opposite sleeve. So again, you could stop at this point with a sleeved blouse with these lovely big volume sleeves. I want to add a cuff to match the bust section though. Before adding the cuff, I wanted to level the length of the sleeve so it is more even. If you look now, the inner sleeve hangs lower than the outside. When the shearing cuff is added here, that unevenness will look unbalanced. Measure how much distance you need to lose on the sleeve hem and use a curve to join it to the outer sleeve like this. I chose to cut away the baby hem already in place on my fabric, but you could unpick it if you wish. To hem, press under by 1/4 inch and then again by another 1/4 inch. There are a few ways to get a baby hem and you can use whatever method you prefer. There is even baby hem foots that you can get for your machine, sometimes called a rolled hem foot. I find this method is accessible to most and also a familiar technique. Sew along the edge of the fold you've created to secure in place. Shirring the cuff is the same technique used to shirr the bodice. I will begin by using the outermost line on my machine as a guide for my first row. I will begin at the seam of the sleeve. Nothing changes to before, it's just a much smaller circle. For my next circle, I align my presser foot with my previous line of stitching. Again, I begin to pull the fabric flat as I sew. The more lines you add, the deeper your cuff will be. I stopped at 3, as this was enough for what I wanted. I'll show you a quick trick here to secure your elastic threads. Begin by pulling your elastic either side of your seam so it crosses over. So this is the seam where you began and ended each row of your shirring. Hold them in place and turn your fabric over so that you can work from the outside and see the seam. We will stitch in the ditch along the seam, securing the elastics below. This is quite hard to film as I don't have much space in the cuff. Just follow that seam line and secure everything neatly. So all them elastic threads now are trapped in that row of stitching we've done, and this is invisible from the outside. You can now cut away the excess threads. So here is my final blouse made from a valance sheet. I've not strayed far from my original plan, but I've adjusted it as I worked based on the features I found in the fabric that helped me. You have this lovely shirred bust that is fitted and will expand and contract with your body. It's a really comfortable design and a method that can be used on many different garments. I went back and fixed these 3 rows so they match the others. And the panel over the hips is loose with lots of volume, and you really could make this as long as you wanted, placing whatever hem you desired. For the sleeves, I add the elastic to stop them falling off my shoulder. That is something I really hate. And I have the shirred cuff and this ruffle of fabric at the end to match the neckline. The back of the blouse matches the front. The side seams are neat and consistent as we entered the shirred in one round rather than as 2 separate panels we joined later. I'm pleased with how it turned out, and more importantly, I enjoyed the process of creating it. If you have enjoyed today's video, please hit the thumbs up, and if you want to see more, hit the subscribe button to stay updated on new tutorials and sewing content. In the meantime, happy sewing!